dear guests, good afternoon. My name is Rusif Huseynov. I'm director of Topchubashov Center, a Baku-based think tank. I'm delighted to extend a warm welcome to each of you in the panel organized by our organization at the 32nd Economic Forum in Karpacz. Today we are having a discussion entitled The Ethnic Issues and Discrimination in Iran, Case of Ethnic Azerbaijanis. While choosing this very topic, which might sound a bit strange for the context of the forum, we were driven by several reasons. First of all, the so-called the Mahsa Amini protests, which broke out last year in Iran, it changed the domestic dynamics in Iran, the ethnic and inter-ethnic relationship. Also, Iran indirectly joined the war in Ukraine when it started providing its UAVs to the Russian forces. Therefore, amid this turbulence and complicated geopolitical picture, we now receive an interesting case about this country. In this very puzzle, very interesting is the case of ethnic Azerbaijanis, also known as South Azerbaijanis or Iranian Azerbaijanis, who make up the most populous minority in this Middle Eastern country, accounting between 15 and 30 million people. So today we have wonderful speakers from different countries of the world who will support this discussion. And we're going to touch upon several topics and subtopics. Let me introduce to you my guest today, Turkan Bozkurt, researcher, University of Toronto, Canada. She's also contributor to Atak Yazı, an important platform which covers the issues related to ethnic Azerbaijanis in Iran, and she's also initiative member of human rights reports of the aforementioned center. Next to Turkan, I have Joseph Epstein, legislative fellow from Endowment of Middle East Truth, EMET from Washington, D.C., United States. He is also a contributor to various media outlets and analytical platforms such as Newsweek, Foreign Policy. He mostly focuses on post-Soviet space and Middle East. Dr. Maurizio Geri, Ramin is there. Ramin Jabbarli, researcher, University of Washington, Seattle, United States. He's a PhD candidate in sociology and editor at the aforesaid Atak Yazı platform, focuses on ethnic conflict, identity, and social movements in the Middle East. Dr. Eytan Cohen Yanarocak, researcher from Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies at Tel-Aviv University and Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He is also editor of Turkish Scope and lectures at several colleges, including Tel Aviv University and Ben Gurion University. Last but not least, a good colleague and friend, Dr. Maurizio Geri, a senior strategic analyst in international security with at least 20 years of experience in NGOs, academia, think tanks, and international institutions. He is presently EU Curie Fellow. Dear lady and gentlemen, once again, I'm delighted to welcome you. And our panel discussion is continuing 60 minutes, 4 of which I've already used. Each of the speakers will have between 5 and 10 minutes. I'm trying to make sure that we have sufficient time for the Q&A session with the audience. I may have also extra questions. Okay, we start, and I want to begin with Ramin Jabbarli and with a very general question. What have been the characteristics and key features of discriminatory policies, if there are any, by the different governments in Iran? Because according to general knowledge, almost all ethnic groups, including the Azerbaijanis, suffered a lot during the Shah period. What has changed since the 1979 revolution? And what kind of policies is the current theocratic government in Iran conducting towards ethnic groups, also Azerbaijanis? The floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. First of all, for organizing this panel. It's a really important topic to discuss here. And if we want to talk about ethnic discriminations in Iran, we need to talk about the origins of these discriminatory policies. And ethnic grievances in Iran generally stem from actually the nation building, the process of nation building in Iran. The process of a nation building in Iran was a kind of exclusive nation building. Mainly, the idea of nationalism in Iran was crafted in 19th century by some Iranian scholars and intellectuals, but its implementation started right after the establishment of Pahlavi dynasty in 1925. Its implementation was, as I said, exclusive, excluding non-Persian ethnic groups from this nation building and trying to assimilating them or Persianizing them through some processes. So one of the policies actually was cultural assimilation of them. For instance, Pahlavi dynasty, the rule of Pahlavi dynasty lasted 54 years. In 54 years, there was no single school in Azerbaijani Turkish inside Iran. And also during this period, only a single book published in Azerbaijani Turkish. It means that the language was banned from official sphere, from schools, courts, and any other public places. So this kind of assimilationist policies implemented in order to build a unified and monolithic nation inside Iran. Of course, even before the establishment of Pahlavi dynasty, there was a decentralized governance inside the country. Even during constitutional revolutions, in constitution there are articles allowing local governance inside Iran. But Pahlavi dynasty, Reza Shah and his son, Mohammad Reza Shah, they pursued completely different policies. Assimilatory policies, centralizing economy, centralizing politics inside Iran, and this caused actually problems for ethnic groups. Imposing the cost of this form of nation building on ethnic minorities was the main cost actually for the ethnic groups. As I said, their language, the language of all non-Persian ethnic groups were banned, and Iran is, also remember that Iran is one of the most ethnically diverse countries in the world. Iran is indeed a majority minority country. It means that none of the ethnic groups inside Iran constitute more than 50% of the population. And in fact, the only cohesive force that bounding actually various ethnic groups inside the country was not a secular national identity, but Shia religious identity, which is followed by 90% of Iranians. So another factor here was the economic discriminations against ethnic minorities in the country. In Iran, the central parts of Iran is where Persian ethnic group resides. Azerbaijanis is the only ethnic group residing in both peripheral areas and also central parts of Iran. But all other ethnic groups, they generally reside in peripheral areas of the country. It's somehow related to political importance of Azerbaijanis. It's also related to how state discriminated economically against the regions, the periphery, and also ethnic minorities. When we talk about economic development during Pahlavi dynasty, some may argue that there were some economic developments, but that the economic development inside Iran under Pahlavi rule was uneven economic development. It was a discriminatory development. There was no cultural and political development, because we cannot define development just economically. And ethnic minorities, of course, were suffering from all these ethnic policies against their regions. The lack of political ethnic representation was another factor, because inside Iran, even governors were appointed actually and sent from Tehran to Azerbaijani provinces, mainly from other ethnic groups. What happened after revolution? After revolution, there was a hope that we will see a kind of improvement inside country, but the only thing that has changed was the rhetoric of government, because all these discriminatory policies remained intact inside country, remained intact, and we saw some other forms of discriminations against some religious minorities, for instance, against Sunnis. And we see a mixture of Shiism and exclusive Persian nationalism inside country. Indeed, Shiism, for most of Persian nationalists, is a Persianized version of Islam. And they use actually Shiism in order to maintain, or in order to serve the interest of country. Of course, when they need that, sometimes they ignore Shiism, even in foreign policy, but sometimes they use for the interest of the country. The unfortunate thing after revolution, of course, was that there is no improvement, but all these factors indicate that merely revolution will not improve this problem. We need more than just changing regime or revolution. We need more social revolution along with political revolution. Of course, all ethnic minorities have been protesting against the current regime, and they see no room for any reformation inside country. But even when we see the discourse of centralist opposition in exile, unfortunately, the centralist opposition in exile, those groups are also opposing ethnic rights. And this is one of the main barriers actually for inter-ethnic solidarity and inter-ethnic social movements to somehow force or change the current regime which violates human rights and ethnic rights in the country. I think any change inside country requires recognition of ethnic rights, ethnic minorities, and without recognition, without acknowledging our differences, any form of inter-ethnic social movement, including revolutionary social movement, will not lead to any successful result. Thanks for listening.
I think we have a couple of more minutes. I wanted to ask you specifically about the Masa Amini protests, which brought new dynamics into the internal situation in Iran. It started as a hijab protest, but then acquired also ethnic dimension. Could you please give us maybe some specific cases, because you documented all those human rights violations by the government against different ethnic groups, including Azerbaijanis. Unfortunately, you will have 2 or 3 minutes. maybe you can give us some specific cases.
Okay, how many minutes?
Okay, 3 minutes.
30 minutes would be enough.
Yeah.
The protest after the death of Mahsa Amini was important protest in terms of ethnic rights. It's mostly known as about the gender aspect of the protest, and of course it was part of protests and demonstration were against the compulsory hijab. But if we pay attention to the slogans were chanted in different areas of Iran, we see that they have different types of demands because of the ethnic issues, because of economic factors, because of gender inequality in Iran. We can talk about different types of grievances. And when they protest together, when there are different types of social movements all protesting at the same moment, then sometimes media tries to cover or somehow make it actually more simple, just saying that this is just for gender inequality, or this is just a feminist movement. Of course, it's an important issue, and all ethnic groups are suffering from discriminatory policies of the state against women. But for instance, in Balochistan, the leader of Baloch is a religious individual. In Tehran, mostly the people are protesting against economic issues and also against compulsory hijab. In Azerbaijan, there were different slogans, such as for justice, freedom, and national governance. The slogan was this actually. And even we see the state repression, we see that state was repressing disproportionately different regions. For instance, Balochs, they constitute only less than 2% of the population, but more than 25% of those murdered protesters was Baloch. So it's an ethnic group, Sunni ethnic group, residing mainly in southeastern regions of Iran. In the case of Azerbaijanis, we saw the similar situation too. For instance, in just first 2 weeks of protest, just in Tabriz, 1,700 individuals, protesters, were arrested. There were numbers of individuals and protesters killed in different cities of Azerbaijan, and of course, Tehran is one of the cities that Azerbaijanis live. Millions of Azerbaijanis live in the city too, and lots of Azerbaijanis also were arrested and sometimes murdered in the city of Tehran too.
Thank you, just in time. Turkan, now I will turn to you. Mr. Jabbarli has explained the general framework and then explained how things developed during the recent protests. Can we touch upon the gender aspects of this situation? Because, as I just stated, the last year protests, this wave started as mostly hijab movement, feminist movement. It was triggered by the tragic death of Mahsa Amini, a young woman who was killed by the police for allegedly violating the dress code rules. So in light of these protests, how do you assess the situation the Iranian women mostly find themselves? What are your observations? Thank you.
Yeah, firstly, I'd like to offer you my deepest gratitude for organizing this and being here, and I'd like to thank everyone for just putting the time in and coming and listening to this, I think, really under-discussed and undervalued topic. When we talk about discrimination of any individual, it is, you cannot just think about it from a one-dimensional perspective. individuals in the world have many different identities, including their gender, their sexuality, their socioeconomic position, like their class, and even the region that they live in. So for being a woman, as is in most places in the world, as is in Iran, only an enhancer of the already existing discrimination. So Iran, it's no surprise that everyone I'm sure knows that Iran has very complex anti-women and misogynistic laws and politics. And the gender apartheid, even though it absolutely affects every single woman, regardless of where they are from in Iran, it impacts all of their lives, and it is a right that's stolen from every single woman. And after the protests of Mahsa Amini, the issue of hijab was covered extensively, as it should be, rightfully so. And it's an absolutely significant issue, but it is not the only form of discrimination that needs to be discussed and prioritized. Because when we discuss discrimination, because of these multi-layered identities, and as Kimberly Crenshaw discusses this, we need to look at it from an intersectional feminist perspective. Because the dimensions of an individual's character overlap. And because of this overlap, the exploitation and the discrimination that's felt is often enhanced and it's magnified. So women in Iran, they don't only face discrimination based on their gender, but this discrimination is actually impacts them differently depending on their ethnicity, depending on their religion and where they live and how much education they have, what class do they belong to. So because of this complex matrix of privilege and oppression, we have to analyze the discrimination of women in Iran from this metric. And like mentioned, the issue of hijab is absolutely, it's a right that's stolen from every single woman. But there are other issues that are equally important, and if not even more pressing, that's often omitted from the Western media. And these are like issues like honor killings, child brides, access to education, and even environmental issues affect women differently, like access to food and water, as we see the entire globe going through a water shortage. And just to give you guys an example to create an image in your head of this different dimensions of discrimination compared to the hijab issue is, for instance, Farzana Mehdizadeh, who is the Director General of the Clinical Examination Office of the Forensic Medicine Organization, found that in the year 2022, so in only 1 year, 75,000 women in Iran went to hospitals and clinics to seek medical assistance for injuries resulting from domestic violence. And if you guys already know, domestic violence is something that doesn't get reported very much. So these are only the reported statistics, 75,000 women from domestic violence. So while we definitely have to talk about the issue of hijab, but I think we also need to keep in mind that hijab is not the only issue. It's absolutely significant, but the child brides and domestic violence, access to education and food and water, or even like cleaning, like hygienic products like pads and tampons. These are not mentioned or not even talked about in a lot of Western media.
Thank you, Turkan. It was a very good explanation, but if you don't mind, we would go more specific now and try to understand what kind of situation the ethnic minority women, Azerbaijanis, find themselves in. And we can actually broaden this category and speak not only about females, but also children and even teenagers, because I believe their situation is not better than women. So, what have you documented about them, about their situation?
Yeah, so at Etek Yazı, after the protests of the Mahsa Amini, which took months, by the way, if you guys weren't aware, at Etek Yazı, we had an initiative group where we were able to gather enough data and document and release actually quarterly reports based on human rights violations that focused on different aspects of an individual's identity, like children, like their age, or women, like their gender. Just some facts to share with you guys that may be disturbing, but I think it's important that it's said out loud and people understand it, is that 14% of all the deaths that happened throughout the protests were children, were literal children who don't even constitute to be adults. Like if they were in Poland, they can't even drink. Just Sarina Ismailzadeh, who was 16, or Asra Panahi, who was 15, who was taken into custody, tortured, and murdered. And she died as a result of her injuries. Or Neda Bayat, who was just 13. Like, can you guys imagine what you were doing when you're 13? This girl is being beaten to death just because she wants her freedom, just because she wants to be constituted as a human being. And when we talk about the issues of ethnic, this gendered ethnic discrimination, I think we see this omission of Azerbaijani women in Western media, and specifically the Iranian centralized opposition in the West, where, when Mahsa Amini was murdered, it was blatantly clear that she was Kurdish. Right? When Faiza Barahui, who was Baluch, right? She was murdered, and everyone knew that she was Baluch. That was her ethnicity. But another famous name that you may have heard of, Hadis Najafi, it was not mentioned in any way that she was Azerbaijani. Or another really famous, Elnaz Rekabi, who is an international climber, and she actually competes internationally. And when these protests were happening, she was in South Korea. And to support her sisters and to support her peers in Iran who were protesting, she took off her hijab, which is banned. You guys already know that. And in nowhere was it mentioned, except the media of the minorities, that she was an Azerbaijani. So we see this omission of the ethnicity of Azerbaijani women. And there's this fabricated myth of passiveness, or like this stigmatized that's applicable to Azerbaijani women that's not applied to the Persian women in the same way, is that Azerbaijani women are passive bystanders. They're not active participants. Participants. I apologize. And we see this lack of coverage of their form of protest in the Iranian centralist opposition media in exile. Fight for freedom is a constant struggle, and while women and girls in the central metropolitan cities like Tehran choose to beautifully dance on the streets and take off their hijabs, maybe do their like TikTok, the dances that's really popular, and sing, and those are all wonderful, absolutely beautiful like methods of fighting, and it should definitely happen, and it's mentioned and it gets coverage, but the form of fighting that Azerbaijani women take is omitted, is not mentioned. There's a huge lack of coverage. And just to give you guys an example, just last month actually, Azerbaijani women mobilized and they gathered in the city of Tabriz to fight against an ecological disaster that's threatening the lives of millions of people, not this generation, but the future generations. And not just the Azerbaijani region in Iran, but also the broader, the country of Iran, as well as bordering nations potentially. And of course, I'm talking about the preventable drought of Lake Urmia. They gathered in Tabriz and they were peacefully protesting. This was not mentioned, and the two of the most influential Azerbaijani writers, Rugeya Kabiri and Nigar Khiavi, they were arrested, as the government usually does, and they're probably some of the pioneers or leaders of South Azerbaijani women right now. Arresting them is a big deal. It was not mentioned. So by giving these examples, I'm just trying to show the necessity of an intersectional feminist perspective to approach this. Issue, we need an inclusive approach that's understanding, that's comprehending, and really recognizing the difference, unique challenges that marginalized groups in Iran face, and how they are magnified depending on where they live, where they're from, how much money do they have, did they have the opportunity to go to school. And just lastly, I'd like to say is like another example is that women who don't have Persian as their mother tongue, as their first language, cannot communicate in that language very well, especially if they are from a smaller city or a smaller village where they don't have enough access to education. When these women end up in the legal system in Iran, where the entire system is completely Persian, they don't even have the tool of talking, language, the legalese to communicate their problems or to explain. And this isn't just in terms of fighting, but it's in terms of domestic abuse. You want to take your husband to court, you can't because you can't speak the language. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Turkan. Joseph, just a few days ago, an article penned by yourself and entitled "A Disappearing Lake Leads to Dangerous Protests in Iran" appeared on US-based Newsweek. Turkan briefly mentioned what it is about. There is this environmental catastrophe which is underway, which is huge. It is about one of the biggest lakes in the region, in the Middle East, which is drying up in a very speedy manner. Why did you decide to focus on this very issue, and what kind of implications these ecological catastrophe might have, and why should the international community care?
Thank you, Rusif. So, Lake Urmia is the largest ecological threat to the Middle East, and it's very pressing. It's a very pressing threat to the Azerbaijani community. It was once the largest saltwater lake in the Middle East region. It was home to a variety of fauna. It was home to flamingos, endemic brine shrimp. It also served as the economic lifeline of the region. It was a hub for tourism, a hub for commercial fishing, so very important to the locals there. Now at this point, the lake has shrunk 95%. And this is all due to water mismanagement and negligence, some of which may even be intentional. The Iranian government has been warned since the 1990s that their practices of damming up the feeder rivers to the lake are just unsustainable. And if the lake were to dry up completely, which currently it's on track to do, 4 million people would be displaced. This number, by the way, it's not my number, it's the number of Isa Kalantari, who is an Iranian politician who served as the former vice president, and he also served previously as the head of the Department of the Environment. So that's his number. Some activists actually put the number higher, at 15 million people. I think in this case, where there's a discrepancy between activists as well as the government, the true figure is probably somewhere in the middle. Even if it is just 4 million, that would be the second largest displacement caused by an ecological disaster in the history of the world. So, in the local residents, the Azerbaijanis, they are convinced that this mismanagement, that this neglect, it all works into the long history of discrimination against them. They're right. They're definitely right. And just a few weeks ago, in the city of Ardabil, which is on the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijani activists actually posted flyers condemning the Iranian government's plan to divert water from the Caspian Sea to the ethnically Persian province of Semnan. This is a province, a very arid province, that is actually known to waste water just due to outdated irrigation technology. At the same time, they're looking at the Lake Urmia and they're seeing that it's dying. And no real action has been taken. The only real action, in fact, has been from the United Nations Development Program in partnership with the Japanese government, out of all groups. And they've spent a few million trying to restore the lake over the past few decades. However, this hasn't really gone anywhere. From the Iranian government, we're actually seeing the opposite. So they're still constructing dams. They even built a highway right through the middle of the lake, cutting off the flow from one side to the other. Last year, Voice of America, their Farsi service, released a report saying that this negligence could be on purpose in order for the Iranian regime to then mine lithium from the lake bed. Some activists paint an even darker picture. They say that this is a Stalinist-like technique, a Stalinist-like tactic, trying to destroy the Azerbaijani region once and for all. With the Iranian government, I'll be honest with you guys, it's hard to tell whether it's malevolence or crippling incompetence. Either could be true. It really could. So this is why we've seen a lot of protests in recent weeks and recent months in the Azerbaijani regions. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has, of course, come out and said it's a foreign plot. They just dismiss it. Some Iranian academics have very naturally blamed Israel. However, the truth is that the desiccation of Lake Urmia, it's an existential threat to the Azerbaijani community. As I wrote in my article, the Azerbaijanis, they can survive discrimination, but they can't survive life without water.
Thank you, Joseph. I've got a second question. As a fellow of a DC-based think tank, could you please share your observation of the interest or coverage of these very topics, South Azerbaijan, amongst the American political circles? Iran is a hot topic, has been a hot topic for decades, but do you think, have you ever noticed that the South Azerbaijani theme is being allocated enough time, enough attention? What is your experience?
Thank you. Honestly, there's not much discussion around the issue of South Azerbaijan in DC circles, and the number one reason for this, the very largest reason, is that the Iranian Azerbaijanis, they just don't have the organization. Unfortunately, they haven't gotten together and really pushed for it. You have to understand that in the American Congress, in order to get a congressman to really champion your issue, you need to be organized and vocal. And also, lawmakers, their number one priorities, they have two main ones, which is re-election and representing their district. These are the biggest ones. And so the Azerbaijani diaspora really needs to get together, especially in areas where they have a significant population, and end up writing letters to their congressmen, forming organizations, telling them that if you don't make a statement on this, if you don't support our cause, you're not going to get our vote. It's that simple. After they are able to do this, I think the best step, because the Azerbaijani diaspora really isn't that big, so they would need to search for allies with similar interests, and there are, they have a lot of potential for it. For example, there are pretty established Turkish organizations active in DC, as well as Israeli and Jewish ones who want a much more belligerent stance taken on Iran. Another reason is that when congressmen or their staffers hear about this issue, hear about the issue of minorities, like Iranian minorities, for example, whether it's the Azerbaijanis, the Kurds, Baluch, it doesn't matter. Sometimes their eyes will glaze over, and they actually do have a good reason for that, and that is they associate it with a call for separatism. In these types of calls, they occasionally hear them, and it's usually from pretty zealous analysts who unrealistically push for it. They act as if they found the key to finally solve the really difficult foreign policy challenge of, say, Iran, say Russia, say China. So it just doesn't sound very realistic, and without an organized group to explain that, no, your support isn't that, this is going to be the main angle they're hearing it from. When it comes to the State Department, I can only speculate. Officials, I think, may have drawn the conclusion that if we were to support minorities inside of Iran, if the regime were to fall, it could lead to a tribalistic mess like what came out of Iraq. You guys have to understand that the Iraq War left a real scar on American lawmakers in terms of not wanting to make that mistake. And the population is very against it for the most part as well. I can understand avoiding the question of separatism. I really do. However, ignoring ethnic grievances, in my eyes, is a very flawed approach to take. Some estimates say that Iranian minorities make up 50% of Iran. How are you supposed to draft a policy? How are you supposed to even understand a country if you're not considering the problems and needs of half its population? And if anything, to me, the situation in Iran reminds me more of the USSR, as minorities are more regionally distributed with their own language and culture. This was actually pointed out by Professor Brenda Schaefer from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. She's done really good work on this, and she pointed out in her book, Iran is more than Persia. She also noted that very often in American foreign policy, when they referred to the Soviet Union, they very oftenly interchangeably would call them Russian. They just assumed that the policy of Russification had succeeded. And so it doesn't matter if you're Georgian, Uzbek, etc., it's Russian. You can see this in speeches if you look back. You can also see it in movies like Rambo, movies I grew up watching. However, when the Soviet Union finally did collapse, a lot of the people in the American security establishment were actually surprised because they didn't expect ethnic nationalism to play such a role in hastening that collapse. So with this all said, I do believe that the situation with the Iranian Azerbaijanis may change. There have been some good signs. Just this year, actually, there was a hearing in the EU on the rights of southern Azerbaijanis. There was also a petition by Israeli members of Knesset to recognize South Azerbaijan. This ended up falling flat, but it's a start, and there's starting to be more and more mentions of this issue in the media. It's still not a lot, but it's getting better. I really hope this trend continues and that it spreads to Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. I agree with you, despite being the biggest ethnic minority in Iran, despite the situation of human rights when it comes to ethnic Azerbaijanis in that country. This very topic is usually under-discussed and understudied one at international level. So I want to continue with Dr. Geri. Back in May, you were standing amid a crowd in Germany's capital. Those were South Azerbaijani activists who organized that mass rally and tried to be vocal about the human rights situation in Iran. What was your experience about that? Because if I'm not mistaken, you did cover that rally, and do you think such events could be helpful in terms of spreading the message about Iranian Azerbaijanis? Thank you.
Okay, good evening. First of all, let me thank the organizers, some of them are here, of this Kermesse, which is amazing with thousands of panels, and maybe next year will be even more, but we'll see. So, this is my sabbatical year, as they say, the academics, and I went sometimes to Azerbaijan country to work on different projects on energy, etc. And I realized when I was in Azerbaijan that 10 million Azerbaijani living in the Azerbaijani state and around 20 or 30 million Azerbaijani live in Iran. So not many people knows about this, neither in Italy, neither in Europe. So when this came to my mind and the demonstration came in Berlin, I decided to go and see and understand the repression of this minority. Because during my PhD, let's remember, maybe you didn't introduce, but I studied in the US the treatment of ethnic minorities in democratizing Muslim countries. And I realized in my studies that what distinguishes a democracy from an autocracy is not so much the elections, is not so much the separation of power, but is the inclusion of all parts of societies. As the professor said here, the nation-state foundation of Iran was clearly an exclusive system that created what we have today, an Ayatollah regime that is a middle-age theocracy, but is also a country that make repression of a gigantic part of its population, not only at cultural level with the rights that they don't have to speak their own language, etc., but even to express their freedom when dramatic events happen. For example, not only Amina, but I heard about the Kordad, you know, this caricature, this racist caricature in 2006 that created hundreds of people dead in the Azerbaijani region of Iran, thousands of people arrested, etc., etc., etc. So all this knowledge, I wanted to bring it to the EU bubble because I live in Brussels and the EU bubble doesn't know much about Iran domestic issues. Why? Because first of all, dictatorships are not very transparent. So we know mostly about the international role of Iran. The fact that Iran is now in Shanghai Cooperation Organization this year, in BRICS, is increasingly bringing weapons to Russia. And so European Union decided to increase the numbers of sanctions, because it's the economic stupid, right? It's the economic forum here. Sanctions work. Let's say that they are not direct, they are not immediate, but they work, as we see in Russia. But they work when they are strong. And right now, European Union is a little bit shy on the sanctions on Iran. We will talk maybe later more about that with the questions. But let me tell you something. I come from Italy, and in Italy we have 5 autonomous regions with more than 10 languages respected by the Constitution. So how come Italy was one of the biggest trade partner of Iran? Mogherini was the first that said, let's do the JCPOA to reinforce economically a dictatorship. And we don't realize how much we have of this human rights violation in the past. Nowadays, more, because after the Amini protest and the killing of the people, our country, our president was very much vocal against these human rights. But I wanted to bring also to my country, not only to you, Bubble, the knowledge of this, because it's not known. And then, when you support economically a dictatorship that destroys part of its population, you will have your consequences in the long term, not only as a legitimate, and moral actions that you are doing, but also economically again. So I wanted to understand more, and I brought this article to EU Reporter. They decided to publish, and I also brought another one on the lack of a coherent foreign policy of European Union, because the problem here is that national interests of countries are one against the other, and often France is going against the European Union interest, including on this situation now. So I hope that my humble contribution can open a little bit the mind of this bubble in the EU, Brussels, and also of my country, of which some representatives are also here.
Thank you, Dr. Geri. I actually wanted to ask you about the knowledge of this topic in the European political circles, because you are coming from another capital, European capital. You already covered. I wanted to ask what can and should be done to address this issue more at a European level. Do you have anything to add, or?
Yeah, well, yes.
Just 2 minutes, sorry.
Yeah. For example, the fact that These sanctions, I don't know if you know about that, but they are just based on travel bans, so some Iranians, they cannot travel. Frozen assets, few frozen assets. The exportation of equipments used for repression or monitoring is blocked. But these are peanuts. These are really peanuts. This is nothing. While European Union has a big power. European Union last year made an unprecedented decoupling from Russia. We have 60% less imports from Russia, non-energy related. Energy more. So if European Union wants, they can do similar things with Iran, which is a country that is waging war not in another country, apart the proxy wars, but inside their country, its country, against its people. This is a question of morality, but as I said, also of economy. Iran is becoming a global threat. Is a terrorist sponsoring state. Is a global threat because it's supporting Russia, but is also increasingly, as I said, in this new, BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, this new alliance against democracies and against the West. So it's time for the EU to wake up and make real sanctions, not these just small things. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Geri. Now I'm turning to Dr. Yanarocak. As you can notice, we are gradually switching from discussing the domestic situation in Iran from gender aspects, environmental issues, to more geopolitical aspects of this story. So, as an expert on the Middle East, how would you assess the role or weight of the ethnic South Azerbaijani issue in the Middle Eastern geopolitics? Do you believe the Iranian Azerbaijanis represent or might represent some geopolitical importance in the Middle Eastern context?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. The answer to your question is, of course, yes. And I'm going to rely on two important dimensions. One is the demographic one, and the second one is the historic one. The demographic one is crucial since the southern Azerbaijanis in Iran are constituting approximately 72% of the whole population in northwestern Iran, which is also can be named as southern Azerbaijan. And if we are going to look at all of the Turkic groups inside Iran, then we can also mention Qashqais, Turkmens, Khorasani Turks, and of course Afshar people, southern Azerbaijan, etc. So the percentage will come to 40%. As a result, we can say that the Islamic Republic of Iran is very much afraid that 40% of its own population may lead the disintegration of from Iran. And besides that, as I already mentioned, these groups, they also have another important historical background. These are the Turkic people. Means that they have very strong relationship with Republic of Azerbaijan, but not only with that, also with Turkey. In terms of history, when we are looking at the geography, the city of Tabriz is considered as the most important city of the region. Only city of Tabriz was handed over between the Ottoman Turks and the Iranian Safavids 7 times. It means that if we are going to look at the history, we are seeing that the Turks always interfered and always penetrated into this area, while the Turks looked at the southern Azerbaijanis or Azerbaijani people as their ethnic brothers. The Safavids looked at them as their fellow Shiites. So this is crucial, demography, history. And if we are going to take all of these to today, so we're going to see that the southern Azerbaijanis, of course, they feel very much detached from the Islamic Republic of Iran. All of the persecution that they experienced did not work throughout the years, also in the Shah regime, also in the Islamic regime, and starting with the first Nagorno-Karabakh war, they began to feel very much identified with their own ethnic identity. And of course, my colleague mentioned the cartoon crisis. There is also the oppression of the football fans of Traktor Sazi Azerbaijani team. Also, we should also highlight that. But I believe that the most important milestone was the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. After the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War and during the war, the southern Azerbaijanis saw that Iran did everything to prevent the Azerbaijani army to liberate the occupied territories from Armenia. And therefore, they organized many protests. And of course, their detachment was even more deepened. In the aftermath of the war, the Turkish president Recep Tayyip Erdogan paid a very historic visit to the city of Baku, and there he recited a very important poem called The Song of the Aras River. The Song of the Aras River historically is known that it is telling the story of the arbitrary division of northern Azerbaijan from the southern Azerbaijan. And as a result of this Aras River incident in the city of Baku, we began to see in the southern Azerbaijani social media, many people got their cell phones and they recited the Song of the Aras River, which is basically declaring their intention to be part with the northern free Azerbaijan. And since I'm coming from Israel, I also would like to provide you an Israeli angle to that. Of course, during the war and also before the war, Israel considers itself as an important ally of Azerbaijan. And after the war, when we have seen this victory, our lawmakers in the Israeli parliament, they decided to take an unprecedented act, and they wrote 32 Israeli lawmakers wrote a letter to the Israeli foreign minister so that the Israeli government will take active role for the southern Azerbaijani cause. Long story short, what we are seeing is, especially after the victory against Armenia, Azerbaijan is no longer will be kept busy with Armenia. Iranians are seeing it, and as a result, the Turks, Israelis, and also southern Azerbaijanis now have an opportunity to seize the day.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Yanarocak. We have only 2 minutes left. You partially explained, and maybe you would like to add some more. To what extent do you think this issue, the issue of South Azerbaijan, does shape Iranian foreign policy in its neighborhood?
First of all, I would like to
2
mention...
minutes, sorry.
2 minutes, no problem. So first of all, I would like to mention that Iran's attitude towards southern Azerbaijan or towards the Republic of Azerbaijan even became more hostile. I would like to underline that starting from 2021, the Islamic State of Iran conducted a military drill called the Conquerors of Khaybar next to the Azerbaijani-Iranian border. For those who are not familiar, what is Khaybar was the city that was ruled by the Jews in the Arabian Peninsula, and the early Islamic armies conquered this city from the Jews. So the message was clear. Azerbaijan, as an ally of Israel, was threatened with this military drill, okay? And not only that, while the Iranian military posed this concrete threat against the Republic of Azerbaijan, the year later, 2022, Iran inaugurated its consulate in southern Armenia, in a region called Siyunik in Armenian, or in Azerbaijani Zangezur. Maybe you are familiar. According to the ceasefire agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, a corridor should be opened from Nakhchivan enclave of Azerbaijan to Azerbaijan proper via Armenia. So it means that the inauguration of this consulate in Zangezur corridor area is a clear message that Iran will constitute an obstacle towards this opening of Zangezur corridor. The last but not the least, in January this year, there was a terrorist attack against the Azerbaijani embassy in Tehran. You can Google it, you can see the YouTube footages. The Iranian policeman who supposed to, secure the compound, blinded, he was turned a blind eye. And the terrorist entered to the compound and killed an Azerbaijani civilian. This is my hope and this is my analysis that southern Azerbaijan will be a very important common denominator for all these three countries to cooperate. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Yanarocak, for clarification. I was expecting we would have some time for extra questions, but unfortunately, time is up and we have to respect the conference timetable. I thank you, each of you, for making such a long journey all the way to this beautiful and mountainous resort town. Hopefully, the discussions of South Azerbaijani topic will continue at different levels. It will be generating more discussions, debates, and interest. Thank you very much and maybe if you have any questions, we can continue at an informal setting. Cheers.